My name is Avery Collins. I'm 31 years old, and I found out I wasn't family from an Instagram post. It was a Tuesday night, the kind that feels unfinished. My laptop was open on the coffee table, half a spreadsheet glowing back at me, half a cold cup of tea sweating onto a coaster. I was scrolling without thinking, thumb moving on autopilot, past engagement rings, gym mirrors, and captions that all sounded like motivational posters written by people who had never missed rent. Then I saw my cousin Lauren. She was standing in front of a waterfall I recognized instantly, even before I read the location tag. Iceland. Dark rock cliffs, white spray in the air, her hair pulled back in a beanie that probably cost more than my winter coat. She looked happy in that effortless, curated way, arms spread wide, boots planted like she belonged there. The caption was short, best family trip ever, white heart emoji, snowflake emoji, hashtag family, hashtag grateful. I stared at the word family longer than I should have. My thumb hovered, then tapped. More photos loaded. My parents laughing in thick jackets. My aunt holding a mug of something steaming. My younger brother, Eli, grinning next to a rental SUV. Group shots. Candids. The kind of photos that said we've been here a while. 9 people. 9 smiling faces. I wasn't in a single frame. At first, my brain tried to soften it. Maybe this was an old trip. Maybe they'd gone years ago, and I just forgot. But the timestamps were current. The stories were live. Lauren had posted a video just minutes earlier. Wind howling, her voice bright and loud. "We made it," she yelled into the camera. "Couldn't have done this without you." Without you. She didn't say who. I locked my phone and sat very still, listening to the hum of the fridge and the distant traffic outside my apartment window. My chest felt tight, but not sharp, more like something heavy had settled there and refused to move. I unlocked my phone again. That's when I saw the tag, notifications. Not on the photos, on the location. My name was attached to the trip's shared album. Not tagged in pictures. Tagged in the place. Confusion slid into something colder. I opened my banking app. I didn't expect anything new. I wasn't even sure why I did it, except some instinct had started tapping at the back of my skull, asking questions I didn't want to answer. The balance loaded. Then the transactions. $1,120, Icelandair. $684, Reykjavik, guest house. $392, Northern Lights tour. $515, car rental hold. $760, Blue Lagoon premium. My throat went dry. I scrolled. More charges. Smaller ones. Spread out. Thoughtful. The kind meant not to trip alarms. The total at the top of the screen made my stomach flip. $9,347.82. I sat there, phone trembling slightly in my hand as the room seemed to tilt. I knew those numbers. I should have. I work in compliance. I track expenses for a living. I know what fraud looks like, how it creeps instead of crashes. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't a mistake. 3 weeks earlier, my mom had called me, excited, breathless. "We're thinking about doing something special together this winter," she'd said. "Just talking about it, nothing planned." I remembered laughing. "That sounds nice." I remembered offering, without thinking, "If you need help organizing, let me know." I remembered the pause on the other end of the line. Just a beat too long. I scrolled back through my statements. The first charge had hit 20 days ago. Quiet, almost polite, right after my bonus landed. My phone buzzed. A text from my Aunt Marissa. "Can you believe this view? Feeling so blessed." No photo attached. No context. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A dozen replies surfaced and sank. "Where are you? Why am I paying for this? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Instead, I typed, "Where are you right now?" The typing dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, Iceland, smiling face with smiling eyes. "Didn't your mom tell you?" I didn't respond. I went back to Instagram and read Lauren's caption again. Best family trip ever. And suddenly, the sentence rearranged itself in my head. Best family trip ever. Just not with you. That's when it hit me. Slow and undeniable. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been used. I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, my phone warm in my hand, watching my family make memories in a place I'd paid for, but wasn't welcome in. And something inside me, quiet, patient, and long overdue, began to shift. Not break. Lock. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring at my laptop. The sun was pale through the blinds, like it hadn't fully committed to shining that day. My bank app still open. I traced each charge with my finger, trying to imagine the process behind it. Someone had been careful, breaking it up into smaller amounts using different merchants, ensuring nothing screamed stolen. They hadn't even used my credit card in one transaction for the big things. They were methodical, deliberate, and I'd been too blind, too trusting, too nice. My phone rang. Caller ID, Mom. I didn't answer. My hands shook slightly. I already knew what she would say. It must be a mistake. It's fraud. I didn't know. I didn't want lies. I wanted facts. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted my family to look at me and see me. Not my wallet, not my default yes. Instead, I found them everywhere. Photos on Instagram, stories on Facebook, a snow-filled Airbnb balcony where my parents laughed like the world had just given them permission to be happy. Permission I had unknowingly bought them. The realization cut sharper than any knife. My family didn't just forget me. They actively excluded me while relying on my labor, my money, my trust. I called my mom's number anyway. Her voice was bright, concerned, too practiced. Avery, you must be misunderstanding. Are you sure that's your account? I let her talk. I even let a few tears leak from the corner of my eyes, though I didn't wipe them. Let her see me frail. Let her think she had the upper hand. Then I spoke, steady. Mom, I see the charges. They're for Iceland. Your Airbnb. Tours flights. My card was used. Without my authorization. There was a pause long enough that I could hear her swallowing. Then the practiced concern returned, like a mask being carefully placed over eyes that had glimpsed too much. Oh, honey, that's awful. It must be fraud. Call the bank immediately. Don't worry, it will be sorted. I nodded quietly, pretended to agree, hung up, and then the anger hit, not the sharp sting, but the slow burn that spreads through every muscle and bone. They weren't trying to hide it. They were counting on my silence, on my decency, on my weakness. They had assumed I would never confront them, that I would pick up the tab and smile as they created memories from my effort. I wasn't going to smile. I opened my emails, cross-checked every confirmation for hotels, tours, and car rentals. I found them. I found a single thread of justification, a forwarded message from Marissa to Lauren. She's too timid to ever say anything. My breath caught. The words weren't meant for me. They were meant to reassure each other, to normalize the theft, to make it acceptable. And it worked until now. I called the bank. Calm, methodical, precise. I want to report fraud on my account, I said, giving the representative each charge, each merchant the exact amounts. My voice didn't shake. I didn't beg. I didn't whine. I was Avery Collins, 31 years old, and no one had the right to treat me like a ghost with a wallet. Within hours, the cancellations started rolling in. Tours were voided. Cars were blocked. Hotels were informed. The Airbnb host replied, "Thank you for the update." Reservation canceled as requested. I imagined their faces on the other end, confused, irritated, entitled. I smirked faintly, but didn't allow myself satisfaction. Not yet. Then came the emails from Lauren, frantic and clipped. "Avery, what did you do? The trip is ruined. You can't do this." Ah, that was the word I had been waiting for. Ruined. Yes, exactly. Ruined. Not forgotten. Not misunderstood. Not ignored. Ruined. I opened my door to see Eli's messages. My younger brother. He was usually chatty, always trying to mediate. Avery, what's happening? Mom and Lauren are panicking. I didn't reply immediately. I let him stew in his own confusion. Then, later, a single message from him. They're calling it fraud. No one can use your card now. The Airbnb, the tours, they can't get in. They're freaking out. I imagine them there, shivering in Iceland, shuffling through instructions, keys that didn't work, phones dead from roaming restrictions, and most importantly, the bitter realization that all those smiles had cost them nothing but my permission, which they no longer had. And that's when I realized something else. The financial power wasn't the only leverage I had. The moral, legal, and emotional consequences were also mine to wield. I spent the rest of that day planning quietly. Not a dramatic outburst. Not yelling. Not posts or calls. Just gathering evidence. Screenshots, emails, payment records. Everything they had taken from me, meticulously documented. If they thought I would allow them to get away with this, they were mistaken. I thought about confrontation, but I didn't want my rage to be obvious. I wanted control, and control meant patience. It meant watching them flounder, seeing their chaos unfold while I remained steady. Let them deal with the consequences first. Let them understand in real time that their entitlement had a limit, and that limit was me. By nightfall, I had a plan forming. Slow, deliberate. No screaming, no door slamming, just leverage. And for the first time since scrolling through those Instagram posts, I felt the tight knot in my chest shift. The Avery Collins in that moment was not the same Avery Collins who had quietly covered their debts and smiled through their thankless moments. Something inside me had clicked. Something heavy and darkly satisfying. Something that whispered, they're about to learn who I really am. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of blue water and white snow, the curated joy of people who had spent my money like it was an unlimited resource. Around 4:30 a.m., my phone buzzed so hard it rattled against the nightstand. Missed calls stacked on the screen. Mom, Marissa, Dad, Lauren. Iceland numbers I didn't recognize. A voicemail notification blinked like a warning light. I didn't listen. I rolled out of bed, padded into the kitchen, and made toast. Plain, burnt a little. I ate it standing up, staring at the wall like it had answers. Somewhere across the world, my family was realizing the truth. I wasn't their safety net anymore. At 6:12 a.m., a text from Dad came through. How could you do this to us? Not what happened. Not are you okay. Not there must be a mistake. Just accusation. I stared at the words, feeling something in me harden. That was it. That was the proof I hadn't even known I was waiting for. I turned my phone face down and went to work like it was any other day. Payroll doesn't stop for emotional collapse. Numbers don't care about betrayal. And somehow that helped. By noon, Eli texted again. They're locked out of the guest house. The door code stopped working. They came back from some beach thing and can't get in. I pictured them standing in the cold, luggage half dragged across gravel, voices raised, fingers numb as they stabbed uselessly at keypads. My name probably being spoken in anger, confusion, disbelief. Then another message. The rental SUV is gone. Reservation canceled. I closed my eyes and breathed out slowly. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even smiling. I was simply letting reality take its course. By evening, my phone was exploding. I turned it on just long enough to read the messages before turning it back off. Lauren, you've humiliated us. Marissa, this is cruel. Mom, we raised you better than this. That one almost made me laugh. The following night, they came home early. I didn't know that until I heard the pounding on my door. It was late, too late for casual visits, too early for anything kind. The knock was sharp, aggressive, the kind that demanded obedience. I didn't open the door immediately. I looked through the peephole and saw my parents, Marissa and Lauren, standing in a tight cluster, coats still creased from travel, eyes red and hard. I opened the door halfway. The air between us was brittle, like one wrong word would shatter it completely. Mom spoke first, her voice trembling in that familiar way she used when she wanted sympathy. Avery, Why didn't you talk to us before doing something so extreme? I tilted my head. I did. Her mouth opened, then closed. Marissa stepped forward, anger spilling out of her. You ruined a once-in-a-lifetime trip for this family. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to be locked out like criminals? I met her gaze. Calm, steady. Do you know how embarrassing it was to find out I wasn't invited to a trip I paid for? Silence. Lauren scoffed. We were going to tell you. When? I asked. No one answered. They came in without waiting for permission, sat on my couch, took up space like they always had. For hours they talked. Over me, around me, at me. Accusations wrapped in guilt. Justifications disguised as concern. At one point, Lauren shoved her phone in my face. Photos of glaciers, waterfalls, smiling faces. This could have been you, she said, if you just trusted us. I felt something inside me snap, cleanly. Trusted you to what? I asked quietly. Steal from me? Lie to me? Pretend I don't exist? Marissa crossed her arms. You should pay us back for the losses you caused. The room went still. I looked at her, then at my parents, then at Lauren. And in that moment, everything became very clear. You took my money, I said, without my consent. That's theft. I didn't cause your losses. I stopped mine. They didn't like that. Voices rose. Blame twisted. But they still expected me to fold, to apologize, to fix it, to be the Avery who smoothed things over and wrote checks. I stood up. If you don't leave, I said calmly, I'm calling the police. Dad stared at me like I'd slapped him. You wouldn't. I took out my phone. They left. But as Dad stepped outside, he turned back, eyes cold. You think this is over, he said quietly. It's not. I locked the door behind them, every bolt sliding into place with a final click. I leaned against it, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something new. Resolve. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to being invisible. The morning after their retreat from my doorstep, I woke to silence. My apartment felt bigger, emptier, but not in a lonely way, in a controlled way. I had space to think, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without tension digging into my ribs. Then my phone buzzed. Eli, they're planning to come back. No explanation, just that one line. My stomach dropped, but my mind went into motion. They hadn't accepted consequences. They weren't learning lessons. They were calculating their next move, and I had to be ready. I spent the day documenting everything. Every bank statement, every email confirmation, every charge. Screenshots stacked on my desktop, folders carefully labeled. Iceland, guest house, car rental, spa, tours. Each one was a thread of evidence, a record of what they thought they could take without consequence. I went further. Doorbell cam footage, timestamps from my security cameras, photos of my apartment entrance. I even walked the street that night to check with neighbors. Someone had to have seen the car, the way they parked, the way they stomped off afterward. And they had. A neighbor 3 houses down described the white SUV, the yelling, the laughing. Everything corroborated. I didn't respond to texts. I didn't return calls. Silence was my first line of defense, and patience my second. They wanted drama. I would give them consequence. 3 days later, the first escalation came. The front door of my car, the mirror shattered. A dent near the wheel. Glass sprinkled across the asphalt like diamonds. I froze for a second, then exhaled. Calmly, I called the police. Gave them the doorbell cam footage, the neighbor's statement, everything. That night, I kept every light on. Not in fear, but in vigilance. I imagined them circling the block, thinking they could intimidate me. Thinking I'd go back to being the quiet one. But I wasn't. The next day, they returned. Same SUV. Same sense of entitlement. No masks. No hesitation. They rang the bell and knocked hard. I watched from the peephole as Marissa and Dad approached, Lauren laughing like it was a joke. Kelsey, their cousin in training, followed, arms crossed, looking bored but curious. I opened the door, chain in place, voice low. "The first visit was recorded," I said. "This one is too. You're trespassing. Leave now." The shift was immediate. Arrogance replaced by calculation. They backed off, not because they understood, but because they realized the consequences were unavoidable. Mom walked down the steps slowly, hand to chest, huffing softly as if suffering a performance. Dad lingered, staring at me like he could still intimidate. Marissa muttered under her breath. Lauren slammed the door with a flourish. They didn't look back as they drove off. I leaned against the door afterward, chest tight, pulse steady. Something inside me told me this wasn't over. Something older than fear, older than instinct. It whispered a warning I couldn't ignore. They would try again. And they did. A week later, my phone lit up. Another text from Eli. They're planning another visit. Tonight. I spent that day preparing. Camera batteries charged, front and side cameras aligned. Lights on timers, lawyer on standby. I had set a trap in plain sight. A coffee shop with full surveillance cameras, well lit and clear sightlines. If they came, I would have everything. Not just evidence, but proof of intent, escalation, planning. The sun dipped low, turning the city golden. I walked to the coffee shop alone. Eli arrived separately, pretending to scroll on his phone across the room. Dad and Marissa walked in together. Rehearsed smiles, perfect casual steps. Lauren trailed behind, half smirk, half nervousness. I didn't greet them, didn't acknowledge them. I simply observed. My lawyer had advised patience. Let them talk. Let them commit to words on camera. And then it began. Mom's voice, syrupy and practiced. Avery, let's just talk. No need for escalation. We can solve this peacefully. Peacefully. She meant manipulation. Her tone said, we expect you to fold. Dad leaned forward, carrying a folded sheet of paper, pretending formality. We've drafted a proposal. A compromise. $3,000. That's it. Accept, and everything ends here. I looked at the paper without touching it. $3,000. Against nearly $10,000 in charges, plus points stolen, plus vandalism. And I knew it was a trap. A public perception trap, a legal trap, a moral trap. I stood, bag in hand. Slowly, calmly, without a word, I walked out of the coffee shop. Left them behind with their stale coffee, rehearsed concern, fake civility. They hadn't realized it yet, but the game had shifted entirely. They were on my turf now, playing by my rules. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded. Not from them. No, they had learned patience or at least restraint. But from the authorities. The police had already opened an investigation after the vandalism report. My lawyer had looped in cybercrime and financial fraud specialists. Every screenshot, every transaction, every email I'd meticulously saved suddenly had a weight I hadn't fully appreciated. This was no longer just family drama. This was criminal. Then the strange thing happened. The story escaped. I didn't post a single thing online. I didn't tag them, call friends, or make a statement. But somehow the footage, the receipts, the timeline made its way to Reddit. The title was brutal. Family steals $10,000, leaves sister out of Iceland trip. Car vandalized, chaos ensues. The thread exploded. Comments flew in, people piecing together transactions, timestamps and photos. Some recognized the locations. Some left advice on reporting identity theft. But the undercurrent was undeniable. Outrage. Public outrage. Lauren and Marissa's social media accounts were flooded with messages. Shame on you. How could you? Stealing from family? Comments tagged them repeatedly. Reviews on Dad's side business, which had seemed unrelated, were suddenly targeted, warning customers of dishonesty and fraud. I didn't touch a keyboard. I didn't reply. The receipts spoke louder than I ever could. Eli stayed with me, quiet but vigilant. He barely slept, checking the streets and doorways, keeping an eye on the outside world while I compiled evidence for the police and the bank. He said very little, but each time our eyes met, there was a mutual understanding. They weren't just numbers on my statements anymore. They were a threat, and we were prepared. By the middle of the week, the legal wheels started turning. Subpoenas were issued. Bank statements, Airbnb and tour bookings, car rentals, and even Lauren and Marissa's own records were subpoenaed. Every time I received a new notification from my lawyer, a sense of vindication mixed with fatigue settled over me. This wasn't fun, but it was necessary. I wasn't letting anyone rewrite the story. Not now. Not ever. Then came the call I wasn't expecting, a federal agent. Apparently, in combing through travel discounts and bank transfers, he found inconsistencies with Uncle Joe's business records and a pattern of unreported income. Marissa's fake charity for discounts, under investigation. Becca's and Kelsey's accounts, cross-referenced. The Iceland trip wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a long-term scheme. I met the agent with all my evidence. Screenshots, receipts, recordings, timestamps, USB drives from Eli, everything. It was a lot, and I had rehearsed every detail so that nothing was missed, nothing misrepresented. By the time I left, subpoenas were already on their way, and court dates had been set. The tension wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. Social media did the rest. Even without my input, people were connecting the dots. YouTube channels analyzed the doorbell footage. Reddit detectives pieced together the financial timeline. TikTok accounts compiled the drama with captions like, "Sister finally exposes family theft." The story ricocheted, unpredictable and unstoppable. And then the final showdown came. They returned, not knocking this time, screaming from the yard, trying to intimidate, trying to spin the story in their favor. Mom sobbed about ruined reputations. Marissa wailed about online bullying. Dad threatened legal action. And Uncle Joe shouted accusations about doctoring footage. I didn't answer the door. I called 911 instead, loud enough for them to hear every word. The cops arrived minutes later. By the time they left, the SUV was gone, the street quiet. Eli finally slept that night, curled up on the couch. "I'm glad you stood up to them," he whispered before dozing off. I gave him a spare key, not as a favor, but as a lifeline. One I never expected he'd need, but knew he might. The next morning, we discovered something extraordinary. A USB drive slipped into my mailbox. No note, just the evidence it contained. Login histories, transaction records, and screenshots proving Marissa hadn't just taken my money. She had also stolen nearly 190,000 of my travel points. Every last detail of the scheme laid bare. The story went fully viral. YouTubers analyzed every charge. Reddit users mapped the theft, the Iceland trip, and even connected Uncle Joe's business practices to the evidence. The public wasn't just watching, they were weighing in, judging, sharing. And the truth was clear. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about justice. For me, for Eli, for anyone who had ever been taken for granted by those closest to them. Months passed. The legal wheels continued to turn. But by now, Avery Collins, me, was no longer the quiet, compliant cousin who silently paid the bills and smiled through betrayal. I was deliberate, measured, untouchable in my new rhythm of life. Every stolen dollar refunded. Every travel point reinstated. Every record documented. My home felt like a fortress. My heart felt lighter. And Eli, he had moved into a small apartment nearby, carrying with him a quiet pride, a sense of security he hadn't known in years. Then the wedding invitation arrived. Thick, fancy, embossed in gold, my name written in swirling script. I paused, stomach tightening. Iceland again. Becca, the orchestrator of the original theft and betrayal, was getting married. And the kicker? Inside, a note claimed, "This celebration is made possible by the generosity of our beloved cousin Avery Collins. We are so grateful for her support." $500 airline voucher included. A silent assertion that they were trying to spin the narrative. turning theft and betrayal into gratitude. I showed Eli. He narrowed his eyes, jaw tight. They want to make it look like reconciliation, but we know the truth. We did. And we also knew we weren't going to let them rewrite history with a wedding card. I sat quietly for hours weighing options. Attend and expose? Ignore and let the story fade? Public confrontation or silent resistance? Finally, the plan emerged. It would be measured, factual, unflinching. Not dramatic, not performative, but permanent. Every detail recorded. Every misdeed documented. The day of the wedding arrived. I didn't rush. I dressed simply, elegantly, something that said presence without theatrics. Eli and I entered separately, blending in as guests but keeping careful distance. Security cameras discreetly rolling on our devices, lawyer on standby, and a notebook in hand with dates, transactions, and evidence. Every interaction, every toast, every claimed gesture of gratitude would be noted. Becca smiled when she saw me, wide, practiced. Kelsey shot a glance, eyes curious but guarded. Marissa and Lauren avoided my gaze. My parents were conspicuously absent. It was all theater, all smoke, but the proof was mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. The ceremony began. Music swelled. Vows exchanged, glasses clinked. I observed, recorded, took notes. Every word of false gratitude. Every attempt at public manipulation. Every sideways glance. They were all catalogued. Finally, the speeches. Becca took the microphone, radiant, perfect. She mentioned me once, briefly, as if it were enough to silence lingering questions. Thanks to Avery for making this day possible. Eli leaned toward me. It's time. I stood quietly after the ceremony, approached a small corner of the reception where a discreet camera angle captured both myself and Eli. We didn't yell. We didn't confront. We presented facts. In a short, clear statement, we documented the timeline, the theft, the vandalism, the unauthorized charges, and the fraud. Posted securely online, simultaneously sent to our lawyer. The ripple effect was instantaneous. Comments, reposts, breakdowns, and fact checks. People compared this wedding narrative with the previous viral story. The truth finally aligned. Becca's attempt at public narrative manipulation failed spectacularly. Kelsey's social media went quiet. Marissa's posts were inundated with skepticism and backlash. Even Uncle Joe's business reviews surged with warnings and truth. Eli and I left quietly afterward, unnoticed, unbothered. No confrontation, no drama. Just evidence, truth, and permanence. That night, sitting on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, I felt it, the liberation of standing your ground, of letting the world see what happens when lies and entitlement collide with accountability. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't a silent wallet. I was Avery Collins, 31, fully alive and fully in control of my life, my choices, and my story. Eli joined me with a smile, exhaustion and satisfaction both etched across his face. You did it, he said quietly. You finally did it. I did what I should have done a long time ago, I said, letting the city lights flicker beneath us. I finally made sure they couldn't erase me or rewrite my story. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental. Power isn't about rage. Power isn't about revenge. It's about knowing your worth, protecting your boundaries, and letting consequences unfold naturally. Months later, the family drama faded into news articles, viral breakdowns, and online discussions. Becca's wedding remained a cautionary tale. Marissa and Lauren's attempts to spin narrative fell flat. My parents, they stopped calling altogether. But me? I thrived. Freelance work expanded. Travel points restored. Finances replenished. Security heightened. Life carefully curated around trust, honesty, and boundaries. And Eli, always nearby, always supportive, a silent reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't mean standing alone. I closed my laptop, smiled faintly, and whispered to myself. They called it a family trip. I found out I wasn't family. But now the story is mine. And for the first time in years, I believed it.